Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Moyer. We're going to go ahead and get this started now. I'd like to welcome you to the Lunch and Learn webinar series that I've been doing for a while now. I'm going to try to compact all this into about 40 minutes or less so that you have a chance to not only soak this all in, but have plenty of time left over to grab a bite or whatever you're planning on doing for lunch. I'm hoping that a lot of these strategies and ideas that I give to you will be easy for you to understand and implement, and hopefully they will lead to a greater financial benefit for you down the road as well. So how to negotiate a higher salary. I'm going to give you these strategies to use when you're negotiating either a new offer that you'll be getting, or if it's time to negotiate during your annual review, whenever that may happen. Some people have it after specific quarters, other people have it end of year, but whenever you have an opportunity to negotiate any element of your compensation package, these are some of the strategies that you can follow. And I always like to tell people, please don't leave any dollars on the table. After all, you are working hard to deserve those and to receive those, so you should be getting them, not the company, right? And here we go, my little title page. Well, first of all, who am I and why am I doing this? I'm going to go ahead and turn on the screen real quick so you can see that I'm actually broadcasting live from New York City. Let me go to the live page. Here I am. This is me, New York City. And I have been coaching people for over 20 years as an executive recruiter and a career coach. I've really been specializing from the recruiting side in the financial space. But on the coaching side, I coach everybody, whether it be people in the medical profession, advertising, legal, financial, all over the spectrum, because at the end of the day, career advice is universal, right? How to interview, how to network, how to figure out what it is you'd love to do with your life and with your career, and really how to get in front of the right people to the point where it is them that say, hey, Mark, hey, Jim, hey, Nancy, hey, Sue, it's been great chatting with you. Would you ever consider working for our company? And it is a process, but my feeling is that the methodology that I teach people in is extremely effective. It's very upfront, very aggressive, but aggressive in a way that matches your personality, not necessarily mine. You can absolutely be a type A networker without having to have a type A personality. So over all these years, I've really been focused on getting professionals just like you into the jobs that you really want to be in, and doing work that you wake up Monday morning and you're fired up to do, not work that you're kind of dragging along and just earning a paycheck. So today's very important, as far as I'm concerned, subject matter is how to negotiate a better salary and better benefits for yourself. So enough about me and my screen, and let's get right into the content. All right. So that was my intro. Let's move things right along here to the next slide. Now, I'm going to throw a poll at you right now, and I'd love for you to answer that as best as you can. You'll see that right here it is. I'm starting the poll now. So, do you feel like you've got the highest offer you could have in your current or most recent job? Please go ahead and click when you get a chance. Whether yes, in fact, I've gotten much more than I even thought I'd get, or you got what you asked for, you're not sure, or you really had to really sort of suck it up and accept an offer you really didn't want. So please go ahead and throw your answers in there as soon as you can. And once we're done, I'll show you the results of those. And I think you'll be pretty impressed with what you see. We'll give it another couple of minutes. All right, another 10 seconds or so. All right, great. I'm going to end it right here, and we'll show you the results. So, impressive. It looks like just a couple of you, only 13%, really got what you wanted. 38% of you got you think you got what you sort of were thinking about, but you're not really sure. Another 38% had to lower your request just to take the job, and 13% think that you got you real cheap. And really, this is no way to be going into a job when you are kind of feeling like you got taken a little bit, right? It's really critical to go into a job feeling like you're being valued appropriately or even higher than you might think going in. And think about it from the hiring manager's perspective and from the company's perspective. They, interestingly, they do want you to feel like you're valued. They do want you to feel like you're being paid what you deserve, because they don't necessarily want to lose you to a competitor, right? They don't want to lose you to somebody else who might pay you what you think you deserve. So I'm going to give you some strategies and some ideas now that I hope will get you towards that amount. Now, the critical thing to take from this opening poll, though, is to really see that maybe from your perspective, you're not getting paid, but interestingly, from the company's perspective, they do believe they're giving you a fair amount. So today, what I'm going to try to teach you is how to negotiate a better offer for yourself. And look, you might have a feeling like you're going to be stepping over the boundaries, you're stepping over that line, and you don't want to push things too far, but it's okay. In fact, some studies have shown that a vast majority of people are negotiating a better salary for themselves and a better compensation, and the companies actually expect that. In fact, one study that I've seen says that 73% of employers agreed that they're not offended at all when people negotiate. I mean, look, obviously it means that a quarter of the people might be a little bit offended, but quite frankly, it's okay to negotiate. It's sort of understood that that's part of the process. And in fact, 84% expect job applicants to negotiate salary during the interview stage itself. 84%. And a vast majority, almost 90%, have never ever rescinded a job offer following negotiations during the interview. And lastly, and most importantly, 0% of the companies that were polled have reported demoting or firing an existing employee simply for asking for a raise. It just doesn't happen. They can't do that anymore. They don't do that anymore. It's absolutely essential that you go ahead and feel comfortable negotiating for a higher salary. So we're going to talk about that today. We're also going to talk about how to fully understand all the elements of your offer and what is truly negotiable. Also, how to use a reverse engineering perspective to help land on the dollars that you want. And I think I might start with that reverse engineering perspective, because it's one in which, whoa, hey, that's me again. Let's get back to that screen share. That reverse perspective is one where it's funny, people don't necessarily look at things this way. So before I jump into all that, please, a couple things to remember. Every once in a while, we'll be stopping for questions. If you have any questions even now, feel free to put those in the chat box. If any of you experience any sort of technical issues, sound, visual, etc., it's almost always a scenario with your bandwidth. Mine is, at least for now, it's cranking along. So if you have any issues, a lot of times the best thing to do is refresh your browser. And at the end of the webinar, I'm going to have a contest to see. I've got either a free coaching session worth $400, or what I might do instead is actually invite several of you to win a question that I'm going to ask from some of the previous items that I've covered. And maybe 4 or 5 of you can win a group coaching call with myself, which people really tend to get a lot of value out of. So before we step into this first slide, before you negotiate, I want to tell you a quick little story about how the reverse engineering part of negotiating a salary can be. A lot of times I train my clients on negotiation strategies that will get them a greater compensation package and obviously leading to greater return. Because keep in mind, every single dollar that you get now is going to be compounded in the future. So, for example, if you negotiate yourself an extra $10,000 now, what you're going to find is that it's going to be an extra 12,000 next year, 14,000 the following, 17,000 the following. It's just going to keep on magnifying and multiplying. And that's what, when people earn a bigger and bigger salary, obviously your bonuses are based on those salaries. So again, it's going to multiply way down the road. So try to remind yourself that every dollar you make today, every extra dollar that you ask for today, or when it's time to negotiate, is going to be compounded down the road dramatically. I mean, it really, if you look at one of these bar graphs one of these days, you'll see that. I mean, you've seen them before when people try to say, oh, every dollar you put into your IRA gets compounded, 30 years down the road. It's amazing how that dollar today will really reflect itself down the road. So, back several years ago when I was looking for a new home up in the burbs, I think a lot of us, what we do is we say, well, gee, what kind of home and how much value in this home can we get for the amount of money we have? Well, some people might say, well, look, I think I'm going to shoot for a house in the $400,000 range. And people will look, they'll look in different neighborhoods, they'll look in New Jersey, Westchester, Connecticut, wherever they're looking. And they say, well, I'm going to look at a $400,000 home. But the problem with that is that a $400,000 home in Connecticut is actually a lot cheaper than one in Westchester County because there are other intangibles. Certainly property taxes, for example, are substantially less in Connecticut. So your $400,000 home, you can maybe knock that up to a $500,000 home in Connecticut versus a $400,000 one in Westchester, or a $300,000 one in parts of Jersey. What's really essential to look at is with your salary itself. You might be thinking, oh, well, I think I deserve a salary of $140,000, for example. Well, if you then get a bonus on top of that, well, is it a horrible thing if you get offered less? Maybe not, if your bonus potential might be higher. Or if you're offered maybe an extra week of vacation. Or if you're offered a higher percentage on your matching on your 401k plan. Or you're receiving some element of stock options, or even a small piece of the company, some equity. There's so many elements to a compensation package that it's really essential to not go into one of these negotiations thinking, well, I must have X amount as a salary. I mean, look, one of the things that I find is a good thing to do is really anticipate what your own personal monthly costs are. How much do you need to earn on a monthly basis after taxes to keep things cranking along? Whether it's, including all your, your budget, so your rent, your expenses, whatnot. And if you can look at it and say, well, gee, I really only need to earn, for argument's sake, $5,000 a month or $7,000, whatever the amount is. Well, then you can back it out that way and figure out, well, what is your weekly and monthly take-home pay that's required for you to live comfortably, okay? Doesn't mean, above your means, doesn't mean below them, but the point is comfortably. Because then what you can do is sort of really estimate from there what it is you feel you need to come home with, okay? So head into the negotiation phase and try your best not to tie it in with your emotions, okay? There's going to be a feeling sometimes in this negotiation process where if you get a little bit less than what you thought you deserved, you might get a little upset or angry, and you're going to really start to take it out on the company. And keep in mind that it's all part of the process. The company is trying their best to manage costs, right? They're trying to make sure that if they're hiring not just you, but several other people for the team at some point, they've got to squish it all into a budget. So they're doing their best to manage their costs. And if they feel that they can get you at a certain amount, they're going to offer you that amount. If you feel that the work that you're going to be providing them and what you're bringing to the table is higher, then that's something you need to go back to them about. And that's what the whole basis of this negotiation process is. So before I go much further, in terms of going into the negotiation process, put in the chat box, if you could, a yes or a no if you feel comfortable negotiating salary. Put in a yes or no, please. a very quiet audience out there. I hope you can still hear me. There we go. Here's a couple yeses. So some of you, looks like some of you are comfortable negotiating, and a couple of you aren't. So as we go into this negotiation process, look, before you negotiate, it's really critical that you really prepare for that negotiation process. I think a lot of people go into it saying they're so caught up in the doing well in the interview process that by the time they get to the offer, they're sort of like, well, okay, I've gotten this far. I can't believe I'm going to get an offer. Uh, you know, I don't want them to think I don't appreciate it, so I'm not going to necessarily negotiate. And they step away. So before you negotiate, research the average salary range for that position. Really get a strong feeling for what others in a similar position are making, what others not are making just in the industry, but also that company in that position. Now, you may think, well, gee, how do I find that stuff out? Well, on one hand, you can go onto glassdoor.com, and Glassdoor is a great resource for getting a feeling for what people make in different positions and so forth. But on top of that, you can just have a casual conversations with other people in the industry and get a feeling for what it is they earn or other people they know earn. Now, the best thing to do is to reach out to people, maybe even via LinkedIn, and simply ask them, listen, I'd love to get your advice and your insight as I'm considering a transition. And I see that you've been vice president of finance over at a Fortune 500 company for the last couple of years. In your opinion, what would be an amount that I should target? You don't necessarily need to ask them what they make, but ask them their opinion on what you should be asking for. And what you'll find is that more times than not, they will give you an accurate representation of what they believe you should be targeting. Now, whether that's less or more than they make is not for you to decide or you to figure out unless they tell you that. But interestingly, when you ask people their advice like that, they will tell you what they think is an amount you should go after. Now, again, a reminder, focus on the company you're looking at and its culture, where they're located. Obviously, if they're in New York City, you're probably going to be seeking more than if they're in Indianapolis, Peoria, Seattle, etc. Now, there's some cities that certainly reflect a similar amount, like San Francisco is very similar. Chicago might be close, but there are others that are not. In fact, several of my financial services clients have opened groups that tackle certain responsibilities outside of New York City in order to save money. And interestingly, I've found that many of those financial institutions that have done that have found that they've ended up spending more money than the savings because they've had a lot of trouble finding talent locally to do that specific task. And they end up having to either relocate people from this area or settle for people and training them up locally. So it doesn't always work that way. But in your case, if you're accepting a position in a specific geographic location, really keep in mind what the what the discount might be and or what the add-on might be if you lived in that area. And also try to think about where that company stands in the marketplace amongst the other companies in this industry. If they're one of the top places, well, then you can probably target a little bit more. If they're not necessarily one of the top ones, then you may have to consider, looking at an amount slightly less. Also, anticipate if you were the hiring manager, what do you think you would offer yourself? What amount do you think you would offer you? And try to be as honest as you can with yourself and really think, well, gee, if I'm not a manager and I need to hire 5 or 6 people and you are one of those people, how do you think you'd quantify that? And also, a very good exercise to do is to have on a piece of paper, really list the things you must have, the things you would like to have, and the things that you can live without. Okay? Because you're not necessarily going to get every single thing that you're asking for and looking for, but that doesn't mean you can't have as many of those as possible. So make those lists. Now, it's funny, people often say, well, Mark, I'm a little bit nervous. I don't really feel comfortable in negotiating. I don't really feel comfortable, whether it's talking to HR or the recruiter or the hiring manager. But look, what I'll tell you is this. If you're dealing with a recruiter, an executive recruiter from outside the company, that is absolutely the person that's going to be negotiating on your behalf. You must be upfront with them and tell them what it is you are looking for, the amount that you would absolutely accept if you got it, and the amount that you really would probably walk away from the offer. Because as a recruiter myself, over all these years, I've found that if I do the negotiation with the individual, with the candidate, in advance of the interview process, where I have a pretty strong feeling that, for example, Susan will take $130,000, but she'd be absolutely thrilled at $140,000, and she'd probably walk away at 120. And if I can go to the client, to the hiring manager, and say, look, you can have Susan, maybe you can have her at 135 to 140, but honestly, it's probably going to take more like 145, 150. Well, I'm pretty confident that that client may not go to the 145, 150, but they may be feeling like they are getting a deal by coming down to 140. But meanwhile, Susan has already said she'd accept it at 130 and would be thrilled at 140. Well, that's the kind of negotiation I like to try to do, is really try to create that gap so that if they meet in the middle, everyone is happy, right? The same thing should be happening with you, where you must go into a negotiation where you have an idea of what the amount is that you'd absolutely accept because you'd be thrilled at it, the 140, the amount that 130 that you'd accept that you'd be pretty happy at, maybe not ecstatic but happy, and then maybe the 120 amount you're not happy at all. Okay, and then we'll talk about that in a minute. But always use phrases like, I am targeting an amount closer to, or your investment in me will absolutely pay off if we get towards the amount we're targeting. Now, I love using the term targeting because, again, you're saying, this is what I'm reaching for. That's what I'm looking for. I'd like to get close to that. Okay? And not, if you're not saying, I will accept that amount. You're not saying, I will refuse that amount. You're not saying, I will do this at that amount. You're simply saying, I am targeting that amount. So this way, if it sounds like it might be excessive to them, they understand that that's your target, but it's not your requirement or your request. And again, I know I'm mentioning this a couple of times, but anticipate what the hiring manager is looking for you as a candidate, and really address those, almost remind them of the values they're getting, the qualities that you're bringing to the table. That will help the whole negotiation. Now, during the interview process itself, while you're going through it, there's a chance and it's likely that you will be asked, well, how much are you looking for? How much, what kind of compensation structure is it that you need, that sort of thing. And I like to say, do not be the first one to approach it, but it's got to get addressed sooner than later. The last thing you want to do is go through the whole interview process only to find that they're 30 grand off, 40,000, whatever the amount is, off of what you're looking for. So please, by all means, make sure that if you're not going through an executive recruiter, an external recruiter, but if you're going through an in-house recruiter or directly with the hiring manager, just simply say, make sure you ask them first though, before they ask you. Ask them, well, what would be the typical salary range for this role? Just say typical. Don't say what is the role, what is the amount, but what is a typical salary range for this position? Because keep in mind also that depending on the company, there'll be some flexibility, especially if they find that you bring more to the table and they can absorb that added value into the role and into the company. I wrote down, do not mention a specific amount that you would accept unless you definitely will accept that amount and be happy with it. Well, I also joked in the next bullet by saying, ignore that last point. Please try your best to not mention a specific amount unless it's an amount that, again, you're saying you're targeting and not that you're going to accept. You're not going to accept at a certain amount. So, for example, if you say, well, look, I'd love to target in the high 120s, in the high 130s or something, but honestly, you would accept that 130 figure we talked about earlier. So you could even say, I'm targeting an amount in the 140s. Well, you know yourself, you'd take 130 and you'd be happy with it. So this way, you're sort of stretching the boundaries a little bit, but you're not expressing an amount that knocks you out of the running. Now, that last thing I say, your past salary history is only a guideline sometimes. Some of us have gone through stretches in our careers where we've not necessarily earned what we really should have. And there have been other stretches, honestly, where maybe we've been paid more than we should have. And it's sometimes a challenge to rely on someone's previous salary history as a guideline to future compensation. So again, what we talked about earlier, your preparation before the negotiation process starts will pinpoint an amount or a range that you really can safely target, regardless of whether you've been paid that amount or not. So, if you are asked, well, how much are you looking for? What do you really want? And we talked about the targeting amount, but keep in mind that base salary is obviously important. But before you get into the specific amount, the target amount, before you say anything, don't show them your cards yet. Ask about what the other components of an offer are. What is the vacation policy? What is, what would be a typical day be there? What are the expectations? And this is not, when you're first interviewing, obviously, but later on, as you're close to getting an offer and so forth, you ask these other questions. You say, well, look, is there a 401k program here? Is there matching? What are some of the other elements of an offer? And once you know those elements, then you can say, well, look, I appreciate you giving me that information. I'd love to get some time to, really assess what I'd love to request, what I'd like to ask for, what you'd like to target. So then once you've figured out what that amount is, and maybe you want to bump it up a little bit and simply say, I'm targeting a base salary in the amount, in this case here, the high 120s. Or in the case I was talking about earlier, where you say, I'd love to target an amount in the 140s. Even though, after you've done your math, based on the different types of elements of this compensation package you'll be getting, you think you'd be pretty happy with 130. It's okay again to say you're targeting a higher amount. Before I go any further, do any of you have any questions? If you do, please feel free to put them in the chat box. I'm more than happy to. I know I'm covering a lot of ground, and really quickly I'm trying to obviously pack this all in during our lunchtime here. But if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat box while we're cranking along here. Now, once you receive an offer, and this is an interesting little thing to do, and it's very effective. When you're given the amount, let's say they say to you, Mark, we really think you're fabulous. We'd love for you to work here. We're going to give you an offer of $130,000 plus bonus, plus 3 weeks vacation, including a 401k plan where you can contribute up to 5%, and we'll match you up to 4% of that amount. You can also, there'll be the ability to purchase some stock at a favorable amount beginning in your 3rd year, etc. When you get that offer, go ahead and look at them and say, you said, I'm sorry, 130K? Okay, 130. All right, well, don't divulge that you're either thrilled or disappointed. Keep the poker face on, please do. Regardless of where that offer is on your scale, if you're thrilled, not thrilled, always ask them, well, do you have any flexibility? What kind of flexibility do you have with that amount? Is there any wiggle room? That sort of a thing. Again, that's almost like the first question you might want to ask as part of this negotiation. And whatever you do, even if they say 145, some crazy amount that you're thrilled with, I urge you, please do not accept it immediately, regardless of the amount. Do not accept it immediately. All right? It's because then they'll start thinking, geez, maybe we gave this guy too much. Maybe we gave her more than she really deserves, or more than she wants, right? So, after the negotiation, make sure you ask for a certain amount of time to digest it, discuss it with someone else, whether it's your spouse, your friends, parents, somebody else that's in the industry, etc. Please don't accept it right away. I mentioned that earlier. If anything, you may want to say, look, I'd love a day. I'd love a couple hours. I'd love some time to just chew on that. Can I get back to you a little bit later? Nobody's going to ever say no. They will always absolutely give you time. Now, if you say that you want, a week to think about it, I'll tell you from a recruiter's perspective, that's always a giant red flag, because what that tells me is that you've got other situations going on, and that you really aren't necessarily in love with going to this place. You want to look at what the other places are saying as well, right? And uh, I might start thinking, well, gee, maybe Mark doesn't want to come work for us after all. What does he need a week to think about? He's already been hearing everything we have to give here. He already knows everything about the position, and now he's heard the offer. So what you need to do from your standpoint is really think to yourself, well, am I willing to walk away from this offer if I'm holding out for other ones? Or is this one that I'd really like to take? And if so, what's the amount that I'd like to accept it at? So usually my rule of thumb is you only need, honestly, you really only need sort of at most a few hours or an overnight to chew on it, unless you've got other things in the room. Now, everybody, including myself, has a ton of examples of situations where you thought you were getting one thing and you didn't. You got something else. You were verbally offered something, and then when came time, whether it's bonus time or raise time, whatever it was, you kind of got screwed a little bit, right? So I implore you to get everything you can in writing, everything in writing before you accept. Now, virtually every company now will provide a written offer letter, but if for whatever reason they do not, it's okay to write your own. Compose your own that includes not just the financial information, the salary and the benefits, but it also includes the start date. And you can say, I will be starting on or before X date, whatever it is, July 7th, March 5th, whatever it might be. I wrote in there expected hours. I don't know if you necessarily need to put that in there. I think that's usually pretty much understood in advance. But if you feel like you walked into an environment where people are there, 18 hours a day and weekends and so forth, that might be something that you want to verbally run by or ask the hiring manager about. To say, what is, in your opinion, what is the expected um, expected time that we need to be, I'll be working here. Don't say, I have requirements, this and that, but just to ask, right? And if they say, oh yeah, no, it'll be a typical 9 to 5 day, you may want to suggest in that letter that, you've been told that your typical workday might be, sort of 8 to 12 hours, 8 to 10 hours, something like that. But I'm not necessarily in love with that idea, so I'll leave that up to you. But otherwise, make sure that in your offer letter it does have all the information about the salary, the benefits, the vacation, your title, and your start date. So before I get into the offer thing, now I know that there's a few questions. One of them is that if you've been displaced, you're out of work, you haven't been working for a little while, and you'd like to get a job with a salary that's higher than what you had at your previous employer, right? Well, again, keep in mind that from my perspective anyway, uh, everybody brings a certain level of value and expertise to a new position. Now, if you were making a certain amount at a previous company, but you feel that it may have been under market, it's okay for you to do that research that we talked about earlier, where you can say, based on what I understand and based on what I'm hearing from the market, and looking at a variety of surveys, my value at this stage to a company like yours would be somewhere in the 140s, somewhere in there. That's the amount that I'm targeting. And they'll say, oh, but we see that you used to make 122 at your previous firm. And you can say, well, yeah, I understand that, except that based on those market surveys and based on what I know from that company in the industry, they were really sort of one of the underperformers within the market. And they have a history of, unfortunately, undercompensating some of the best players, best people. And this is just another reason why I'm thrilled and delighted to be here at your company, because clearly you reward top performers. But make sure you put it on them. Make it sound like, it's clear to me that your firm understands and rewards top performers. Because it almost be like it's a, yeah, I guess we do. And they're not going to say, no, we're cheap and we hate paying people what they deserve. So it's really essential to do that. Now, I want to just quickly go over, and it's just literally a minute or so, just something that I'm offering today. And that's, look, one of my one-on-one personal coaching sessions, I always tell people they can be pretty pricey. Obviously, I have a pretty large coaching practice, and I have a fair amount of people. But I want you to, in a few minutes, I'm going to ask you a question that's from one of the things we have already talked about. And if you stay to the end and you answer it correctly, I will give you access to one of my group coaching calls that I do typically charge $97 for. So during those calls, what we do is we cover a variety of things. We'll talk about a specific topic, but we'll also talk about your individual job search and advice that I can give you directly that I'd normally be giving you one-on-one, but I'll give it to you directly on those group calls. And we'll also talk about how, and you'll be able to listen to what other people are doing and how other people are being, treated throughout that whole job search process. And you'll get a whole chunk, a huge amount of job search advice during those group calls. So I am offering those group calls today, and going forward at just $97 a call. We're going to be having one a week from today, and it's going to be at the same time. And these things are fantastic ways to really absorb a ton of advice and a ton of information as you go through your job search. So you will be receiving the same content that I give out in these one-on-one calls sessions. Now, one of the things that I like to say is that there's absolute ton of free advice out there. And I hate to say this, but a lot of it's kind of old school. A lot of it's not really exactly groundbreaking. A lot of it's so obvious it's ridiculous. But a lot of the professionals that I teach, that go through my program, not only do they find out what their dream job is and how they really can get it, but they develop a list of people that they can network with and how to really extend that network. And they become expert networkers. They become people that get super comfortable talking to hiring managers. And then from there, these conversations turn into interviews and then eventually offers. In fact, one of the guys that I'm coaching now, just doing some of the LinkedIn networking that we talked about, he just started sending out some of the personalized invitations late last week. He already has 5 calls lined up tomorrow and another 3 on Thursday from people that are interested in talking to him about what he wants to do next. And this is all from just using some of the LinkedIn strategies that I teach people during these coaching calls. And it really is remarkable how some of these strategies nobody else is doing. Well, unless they're being, I guess, tough on me, but look, there are going to be some other people doing these things, but it's a unique strategy that really gets you in front of hiring managers a heck of a lot faster than either you'd be getting from a lot of the free advice that's out there, or just doing it on your own, or relying on another recruiter, or relying on your friends and family. So I think it's just about time for me to throw the question out there to everybody. And for the first 5 people that reply with the correct answer, first 5 people that reply to the correct answer will get free access to my next group coaching call. But before I do that, just wanted a quick, before I get into that question, I'd like you to put in the chat box just a quick sort of yes or, yes, did you get a lot from this call today? Do you have any further questions that you'd like to throw in there? And, is there anything that you feel you could use more work on? Go ahead and throw that in the chat box there. I'm going to take a couple second break here, get a sip of water. And once you reply to that, then I'm going to go ahead and give you that question that will, you can win me access to the group call. Great, I appreciate your feedback. This is wonderful. I always appreciate that people find a lot of this helpful. It's interesting. When I was looking for work many years ago, I certainly didn't have a resource like this, or if it did exist, I didn't know about it. But fortunately, because the market is so challenging these days, it is good to know that there are more and more people that are uh, getting involved with the coaching, because it is something that really, people that go through coaching not only tend to land positions that they really want to be in much faster, but also while they're working, they're elevating themselves past their colleagues because they are getting some great advice from people that really understand this stuff. So I appreciate your feedback. So here's the question. Earlier, I told you some stats about the amount of people that were getting, if you negotiated, how many times they expected people to negotiate, not negotiate, and so forth. So I'm asking you now, what percentage of people were they expecting in other words, the client, what percentage of the people were they expecting to negotiate a higher salary? In other words, out of 100%, what percentage of people were being expected to negotiate a higher salary? I know that's a horrible. I asked that totally differently backwards, but if you can throw out some numbers, and I'll tell you if you're on the nose or not. And for the first 5 people that get that amount, you'll get that free coaching call, group coaching call. Let's see. One person says 74. Any other guesses? 75, 74, 82, 82. Around 75, 73.4. I love these guesses. Now, I guess because my question was a little wishy-washy, there's a couple of numbers. One of them was actually 73%, and one of them was 84. So I'm going to, basically, for you 6 people that have jumped in initially right off the bat with the first 6 guesses, I'm going to give you access to the call. It was honestly, what I was looking for was 84%. 84% expect the job applicants to negotiate a salary during the interview stage. 84%. So you all sort of undershot that, which is okay, but I all want you to know that a vast percentage of people that are on the hiring managing side, on that side, are expecting job applicants to negotiate the salary. So I want that to be your takeaway from this webinar today, is that 84% plus of hiring managers are expecting you to negotiate your salary. This webinar will be posted on YouTube in a little while. And for those of you that made a guess, I appreciate your guesses. And in fact, I've got your contact information. I'll reach out to you, and you will have access to that group call coming up next week. Any last minute questions before I close this down? Feel free to put them in there. And if not, I really appreciate you all attending, and your engagement is always wonderful. And thank you for answering the poll questions. And I look forward to doing this next one more time. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and best of luck with your job search. Thank you.